With the White House as his backdrop, the president accepts his party's nomination for another 4 years. But will voters buy the GOP pitch that Trump is the indispensable man for these turbulent times? In Kenosha, Wisconsin, the police shooting of Jacob Blake sets off rioting and deadly vigilante violence. Will this latest tragedy generate consensus or further divide the nation? Here in Texas, Greater Houston dodges Hurricane Laura's fury. But with more killer storms certain to build in the Gulf, what's holding up construction of an dike to protect us all? I'm Greg Groogan, and welcome to What's Your Point, where our panelists call it like they see it. Let's greet them. Starting us off, founder of Urban Reform, Charles Blain. Next, Tony Diaz, host of Latino Politics and News on KPFT Radio. In the 3 spot, longtime super neighborhood leader Tomaro Bell. Batting cleanup, legendary reporter turned investigative media consultant Wayne Dolcefino. And finally, well-known businessman and columnist Bill King. Let's begin. Portrayed by his supporters as no less than the bodyguard of Western civilization, Donald J. Trump gratefully accepted his party's renomination for presidency of the United States. His speech on the White House lawn capped 4 nights of slickly produced political infomercial delivered with a degree of polish which easily matched and in some ways exceeded that generated the previous week by Democrats. The core pitch: Donald Trump acted swiftly to contain COVID-19, engineered an unprecedented pre-pandemic economic boom, elevated America's standing in the world, and stands ready to preserve law and order against radical mobs.
No one will be safe in Biden's America. This November, we must turn the page forever on this failed political class. The fact is, we're here, and they're not.
Of course, there was much more, but we need to start the conversation. Panel, do you think critical swing voters are buying what Trump and the GOP are selling? Let's start with Charles Blain.
So I don't know that he needs to convince them that he's indispensable. What I do think he needed to convince them, and I think he really tried to, and his surrogates tried to, was that he is the best to lead the country forward through the economic downturn, through the pandemic, and through the civil unrest with as little downside as possible, if you will. And so I think that's why he had the kind of duality there of the police union and of Alice Marie Johnson talking about criminal justice reform and law and order. I think that's why we saw other things, messages about the pandemic and the work that he's doing towards a vaccine. And so I don't know if swing voters are going to buy it. I think the message was clear. It was heard loud and clear. It's going to be interesting to see in the coming weeks if they accept that message. But I think the surrogates and the president did a good job in trying to convey that message.
Tomaro Bell, I've been waiting all week to hear what you think about this.
No, you hadn't. Please don't. Because I understand what Charles said. I love you, baby. I love you. But I don't believe that it was convinced, because people are looking at reality, not delusion. And in reality, the pandemic was not handled the right way. The deaths, beyond multiplied. They went through the roof. But had we acted swifter and enforced some sort of mask order, whether you say, hey, look, you should wear one sometimes, wear any times, but to say don't wear one no times, I believe that led us to where we are. And then to defy, you put in place doctors who have went to college to be where they are, and you who went to no college and don't have no damn MD degree, but you want them to listen to you instead of them. So, like Charles said, in the coming weeks, we'll see.
Okay, Wayne Dolcefino, was the president and his team on target?
So, look, I'm not one of those guys that believe Donald Trump's going to save civilization, okay? So let's put that here. But what I do feel very strongly about is that the Democrats are in trouble, and they know it. And when they didn't say anything, when people started burning down buildings and looting and causing all this nonsense, they forgot some basic tenets. Most people, most Americans do not believe we are systematically racist, because we're not. And most Americans want law and order. They want their families to be safe. If the Democrats can't muster enough huevos concheros to say that someone who burns down a building and throws munitions at police officers are wrong and should be stopped immediately, that is why they will lose. They know they're in trouble. They see the polls, and guys like Charles, who are involved in consulting and stuff like that, know it as well. That's why they're in trouble.
Okay, Tony Diaz, are the Democrats truly in trouble? Does Donald Trump have them on their heels with this presentation this week?
Not at all. I really think that the Republicans are abandoning the party because they know that Donald Trump's numbers are down and people are seeing through his act. That wasn't the Republican convention. There were no leading Republican figures there. That was the Trump convention. And he has to really just make it a Trump show because reasonable Republicans are not following him anymore. And he's using a lot of these authoritarian tactics. So he may say that this is about law and order. One, he's the guy running the country as he claims things fall apart. Additionally, he's the one that started this mess because he ignored Colin Kaepernick's peaceful protest. Had he not said that they were a bunch of SOBs for standing for their civil rights, had he not tried to pit Americans against each other, we might not be in as big a strife as we are in, which he keeps critiquing. Additionally, he tried to put himself above the law by breaking the Hatch Act, by really making officials of the U.S. government suspect because they are grandstanding and politicizing. And worse, he put Americans in danger. The folks who support him, they still went to those conventions. They really exposed themselves to COVID-19. I'll bet you they signed a waiver where they won't hold him responsible. And he probably has a non-disclosure clause because he's really good with those.
All right, I saved Bill King for last, the moderate pragmatist. What was your take on the Republican National Convention?
Well, I think the election is still Biden's to lose at this point, but the polls have shown that it's closing in the last couple of weeks. And I think what people forget is there's two things going on in this election. First, both sides have to motivate their bases. And it looks like to me both sides' bases are about as motivated as they can get. I think what's going to make the difference is that small number of people in the middle that are still undecided. And that's mostly white suburban women are the ones that are persuadable at this point in time. And they've been reacting negatively to Trump just because of his deportment and demeanor. They don't like that. But I tell you what, when they turn on the television and see cities burning and all that, it scares them. And so I think you're beginning to see that. Look, the only real argument that Trump has at this point in time, I think, is the law and order argument. And that's why you see that coming back over and over and over. And I think that that if something doesn't change, I think that the race is going to close even more.
Okay, we're going to leave it right there for a moment. Home field advantage. Did the president and Republicans just scoff at laws barring politics on government property and campaigning by government employees? Welcome back. At this year's virtual RNC, there was one break with convention, which many believe actually broke the law. Peppered throughout the four-night event, appearances by cabinet members and high-level members of the Trump administration proudly campaigning for the commander-in-chief. Potential violations of the Hatch Act, which prohibits federal employees from participating in political activity while on duty. Also, plenty of complaints about exploitation of presidential trappings, everything from Marines in full-dress uniform to the White House itself as a campaign stage. Panel, what's your point? Let me start with Bill King on this.
Well, the Hatch Act is honored mostly in its breach. Lyndon Johnson famously said that he was going to do the Rose Garden strategy. He was going to be campaigning in the White House Rose Garden. You know, I don't know how you go about enforcement. I don't like the fact that incumbents use the advantage of their office. But it doesn't just happen at the federal level. At the state level, it happens at the local level. You know, back in my campaign in 2019, we saw surrogates for the mayor out on, city time, actively campaigning. So I don't like it, but I don't know anything we're going to do to stop it.
Hey, does this bother you, Tony Diaz?
This is really compromising all of these officials who are supposed to work for all Americans. I think even worse, he's kind of forcing these folks to pledge of allegiance to Trump, not the United States of America, because they basically are thwarting rules and policies. And the irony is, Trump says he wants law and order. He keeps breaking laws under our noses and flouting it and doing without any sort of regard. That very much is like a socialist dictator where he's above the law. He tells us to do one thing, and the hypocrisy is really clear. Pompeo told all his employees, y'all better slow down, not take a side, and then Pompeo turns around and takes a side.
Charles Blain, is this much ado about nothing or just a different set of rules for Donald Trump?
I mean, I think it's an issue. I'm not going to say it's not. My issue isn't so much with the president, giving his speech at the White House or the first lady giving her speech at the White House. It is with the use of the press secretary, the HUD secretary, the DHS secretary, the secretary of state. For me, it sits odd because on Thursday, the DHS, Department of Homeland Security, issued a release to their employees saying that they need to be very careful about any political activity as we head closer to November. And then you have the secretary involved in a naturalization ceremony. Now, I think there are questions as to whether or not they were on their personal time. I mean, it was after work hours, so they could be on their personal time. But there are questions that need to be answered. It doesn't sit right with me, especially because it does seem like a double standard for DHS employees when their boss is participating in the convention.
Tomaro, take 30 seconds.
You know damn well when you DHS secretary, you ain't got no personal time. You are always on the clock. And one of the things that bothered me most that he said, he was like, what is the name of this building? And it's the White House. He said, yeah, you see, we're here and they're not. And I'm like, okay, so you're going to make sure not only are you going to violate the Hatch Act, but you want to remind everybody like we don't see the White House behind your ass, okay? That bothered me big time.
Okay, Wayne, closes out here.
Okay, so nobody really realized that Trump was the president and the Republicans won last time. You know what bothers me more is the people who left the White House, right? The great White House, who were attacked with F you, I'm going to kill you, anti-gay slurs. People were almost assaulted by all these peaceful protesters out there. And what you guys are worried about is the Hatch Act, and not that we have a bunch of crazies out there that threaten to kill people in public and nobody says a word.
You can be worried about both.
All right, hey, we got to leave it right there. Still ahead. Calls for change reignite nationwide after the police shooting of Jacob Blake in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Stay with us. There's a lot to talk about. Here's what we know for sure. In Kenosha, Wisconsin, officers responding to a domestic disturbance call attempted to arrest 29-year-old Jacob Blake, a black father of 5. Blake resisted and fled to his vehicle where, during a close encounter with Officer Rustin Shesky, he was shot 4 times in the back while entering his SUV as his 3 sons watched. By now, most of you know the policeman is white, Blake is likely paralyzed, and video of the incident sparked rioting in Kenosha, which turned deadly when Kyle Rittenhouse, a 17-year-old self-styled militiaman, shot and killed 2 protesters and seriously wounded another. Wisconsin Governor Tony Evers called in the National Guard while insisting he stands against excessive use of force when engaging black Wisconsinites. Professional athletes in multiple leagues boycotted games Thursday and Friday in solidarity with Blake and his family. Panel, a great deal to unpack here, roughly 3 months after the death of George Floyd. Let's go to you, Charles Blain.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank God he survived this. I think that's the biggest thing here. But I think there is a lot to unpack. I mean, they did say that he was tasered and wasn't stopped by the tasers and kept moving forward. And so I can see why it had escalated. The issue I take with this is that there were 7 shots from one officer into this car, and he was right there. I mean, at some point, you would think with the first, second, third, that he would realize that the guy was subdued and didn't have to continue shooting. So that's the issue I take with that. The other side of this, though, is that we have people who are now taking it upon themselves to go out and push back against these rioters, and they're armed, and listen, I am all for legally carrying and using your weapon to protect you, But when you're going out there looking for trouble, defending property that is not yours, I think that is just escalating the situation. And I think we're starting to see more of that with people getting out here trying to take things in their own hands. And I don't think that's what should be happening. They should be relying on local law enforcement, National Guard if necessary. But this new act of having folks go out there and start defending property that's not theirs, it's not okay either.
Okay, Tomaro, what's your take on this?
I agree with what Charles said about the 7 shots, but what the officers are trained to do is called force continuum. If you don't know what that is, you need to look it up, because when they shoot to kill. Was that necessary in this case? Absolutely not. You got 3 officers, 2 weak to do 1 person to get handcuffs on them. I don't get that. How was he able to get around to the car? He said he had a knife in the car. I don't know about you all. I've never seen a knife win a gunfight, ever. Okay, so I don't believe it took all that to get him. But what I found even more appalling was as he is in ICU, as he is clinging to life, he is paralyzed from the waist down. Why the hell you got to shackle him to the bed? What sense does that make? I'm not even going to address the damn fool 17-year-old, because you did a great job on that, Charles. But what is that? What was the point of shackling him? Where the hell was he going?
All right, Wayne Dolcefino, I know you have strong feelings about this. Unload.
Look, can we also, look, I don't want anyone to get shot. I don't want anyone to get paralyzed. I don't want anyone to commit crime. I want everyone to live in peace and harmony, okay? That's my 15 seconds, all right? When are we going to add to the conversation some damn responsibility in this country? Guy's got a warrant for sexual assault, goes to the place he's not supposed to go to, gets into a fight with cops, gets tased, doesn't stop. There are 5 guys pointing guns at him, telling him to stop, and he keeps walking. Last time I checked, that's going to get you killed, okay? And if we don't start telling people that it's not okay to commit crime and then say, well, gee, they shouldn't have shot me 7 times or 3 times or 1 time. Look, stop committing crime. That's the answer. Then you don't have to worry about any of this other stuff. I'm not defending it. I'm just saying, why don't we just tell people, stop going to your ex-girlfriend's house who you wanted for doing something to, and then use the, well, I had 5 kids, I had 3 kids. And don't take your damn kids to a place where your sexual assault victim is. Come on, guys. Let's be fair.
Okay, Tony, we had riots after this. Were they justified? Were people right to take to the streets after this shooting?
Listen, of course, we don't want violence in the streets. We don't want people who are innocent hurt or killed. And I think what's worse is that at the Trump convention, here we are talking about all these layers, all these nuances. The president did not address any of this as it was going on under his nose. Instead, he seems to be stoking these flames so that he can scare people into voting for him instead of actually leading. You want to talk about responsibility? He is responsible for having the wisdom and the judgment and the intelligence to stare these issues in the eye, really break them down, and come up with policies that protect all Americans. Instead, all he did is allude to mayhem in the streets, which is happening under his watch, and really try and get Americans to be mad at Americans. I think what it boils down to is both sides need to have a president that can guide us through this. Donald Trump is not that president.
Okay, stay right there. On the other side of this break, we continue our discussion of the fight for racial justice and its potential impact on the November election. Welcome back as we continue our discussion of the police shooting of Jacob Blake, the following protests, violence, and national cries for justice. Panel, this may sound cynical, but is it highly possible some in the Republican Party are secretly rooting for more riots, just as some have accused Democrats of secretly rooting for COVID-19 to linger through the election? Hey, Bill King, I want to start with you.
Yeah, I've had exactly that impression watching some of the news coverage. But on the police issue, I think this politicization of it is really obscuring what the real issues are. First of all, the fact that we're seeing all this on video now is because everybody's carrying a video camera around in their pocket, which means that this has very likely been going on for a long time, and we didn't know it was going on. At least white America didn't know it was going on. So I think we need to understand that these are not isolated. It suddenly came into existence now. The second thing is, in looking at this Jason Blake video, I cannot understand why this young officer started shooting. It just doesn't make any sense to me. Now, you can't really see exactly what's going on, but the guy's leaning over in his car, and all of a sudden he just starts blasting away. I can't imagine that's because he hated this guy. You know, maybe he was more afraid of him because he was black. I don't know. But the problem to me is the training. And I think, you know, we take these very young people and we put them out on the street with lethal force, and the training is, you know, a few weeks sometimes. I think if we're going to give somebody that kind of power, we've got to take the training and the force de-escalation, as Tomaro referred to. I think we've got to take that a lot more seriously in the training of these young people if we're going to ask them to do this very difficult job.
Tomaro Bell, you've heard the conversation. What do you have to add?
I definitely know that there are agitators who come into these events to start stuff. During the Houston protest for George Floyd, I took my family out there, and there was a guy walking through, and he was saying, we need to do this and we need to do that. And so I went to the organizers. I was like, hey, look, I need to check this guy over here. I said, because the crowd, we're just walking. I said, he's bumping into people and going through and telling people, we need to just storm the castle. We need to go on. You know, and I was like, and sure enough, they were like, hey, look, we done checked him when he was there. I didn't go to the first one. They were like, he was there, but he was from out of town. And I was like, I know that people do come in to infiltrate and to make it worse than it is. I know that that does occur because I witnessed it.
Charles Blain, could this election turn on how many riots we have between now and November 3rd?
Certainly. I mean, I think people are fearful. People who are living in and around major metro areas are fearful about what's going on, and they can't help but to see it. And even if you don't live around a major metro area, you turn on the TV and it's on TV night after night. We've had like 90 straight days of protests, many of which have devolved into riots. So yeah, I do think it could turn it, but I don't think the Republican message, which is saying that this is Joe Biden's America, is going to work, because the truth is we are living under President Trump, and it's happening right now. So we need to send a signal that they are trying to fix it, and that if Joe Biden is elected, they feel as though it will get worse. Not this idea that this is what Biden's America is, because we're living in current reality and he's the president. So yes, I think it could turn the election, and people need to get back to this kind of interconnectedness so that we can move away from this, because it's a serious problem in every city we have in America.
Okay, we're going to leave it right there. Next up, as a monster storm slips past, Houstonians keenly aware next time we may not be so lucky. We're talking DIKE when we come back. Welcome back. This week, Greater Houston didn't just dodge a bullet, we dodged a howitzer shell. With Hurricane Laura drifting east to hammer into the Louisiana coast, we are left this time to thank our lucky stars that the storm, with its 150-mile-per-hour winds, didn't mow through the nation's fourth largest city. We are also left to wonder why the best possible protection on the table, the so-called DIKE, remains on the drawing board. In a nation that has coughed up trillions for pandemic relief, the $30 billion price tag for a 70-mile coastal barrier seems like a rounding error given the millions of lives and incalculable strategic infrastructure at perpetual risk. Let's go to Bill King on this. He knows something about it.
Yeah, I was on the state commission that studied Ike after that storm passed, and I was there when Bill Merrill first walked into the commission hearing and said, this is the solution. And I recognized immediately that he was right, and it's the only way to do this. Let me just explain what's at risk. There's something that the forecasters call the Scenario 7 storm. It's an Ike-like storm that makes landfall somewhere between San Luis Pass and Freeport. So it puts the dirty side of the storm right up the west side of Galveston Bay, up the ship channel, and into Houston. Probably 5,000 to 10,000 people will be killed in that storm. The damages are billions and billions of dollars. And here's maybe the most significant thing that people miss. It will also be the greatest disaster in the history of mankind. There are 12 Superfund sites that will be inundated by that storm surge. It will wash all of that crap out into the environment the same way that the 1900 storm permanently changed the trajectory of Galveston, that storm will permanently change the trajectory of Houston. This is an existential threat, and I promise you that every single person I vote for in the fall, not one person will get my support that doesn't support building the ice dike.
Okay, Charles Blain, you heard Bill King. Should this be the #1 priority for our senators, Cruz and Cornyn?
Well, that's terrifying, Bill's example there. But yeah, of course it should be. I mean, it should be the #1 priority for everyone from our local level to our state level to our federal level. And if you don't have the power to make it happen, then you need to be using your voice and your platform to make it happen. Because this is absolutely absurd. We came very close to a devastating storm. And, you know, I give so much credit to I know a lot of people on this panel know Evan Mintz, who on Twitter for years has been trying to remind people about the Ike Dike. I mean, it is incredibly important, and there is a lot at risk. And I know that they said it's going to take 15 years. Well, the thing is, it needs to get started now, because it's unrealistic to think that we're not going to have more bad storms within the next 15-year time span. But I did see that public comment on the project opens up in November, so the public should be paying attention to what these plans are when they come out.
Tony Diaz, guess who those 5,000 casualties would be? I'm guessing there'd be poor people and mostly people of color. Why aren't we doing this?
I tell you what, if I was running for office, be it state senator, county commissioner, I would just pound away at this issue. And this is a great way to cross ethnic lines, class lines. I don't care if you're Democrat or Republican. That water don't ask. It's just going to rush into your house. And let's get real. In the neighborhood like Spring Branch, where you've got a county commissioner's race, state rep races, walk along that Addicks Dam after it rains a little bit. It's already starting to flood. The streets in Spring Branch, luckily, some don't flood as much as the others, but folks, under any storm circumstances, they got water in their car, water in their houses, and this is really something that something can do. It's about public service. It's about using our money. Elect people that make this the #1 issue, and if you want to do something about this, I would like to see people run on this campaign, and I'll bet you, not only you make a difference, but you'll win, and you'll change the world, and you'll save Houston.
40 seconds, Tomaro Bell. Are folks in the neighborhood aware that this preventative measure is on the table?
Yes, we're aware, but we don't understand why it hadn't started. Because I had severe damage during Ike. My neighborhood, especially the front of McGregor, for the first time in history, was devastated in Harvey. I mean, when I saw Laura, I was really worried. That would have been catastrophic for us. I don't get 12 years. 12 years, and we haven't turned the first dirt.
All right, Wayne, about 15 seconds. What's your take?
I'm a cynical guy. I used to say if I was going to be a crook, I would have gone into hurricane fraud. Part of the problem here, Greg, is that so many people are making so much money off disasters that they probably don't want to give it up.
Gotta leave it there. Gotta leave it there. Up next, the CDC draws fire for discouraging universal COVID testing. We work through the fallout after the break. Welcome back. Plenty of controversy this week after the CDC on Monday revised its guidance to limit COVID-19 testing to those who show symptoms of the disease. Backlash among public health experts concerned about asymptomatic carriers prompted CDC brass to walk back the announcement and suggest those who believe they've had contact with a COVID-19 patient could seek testing. Panel, what's your take? Bill King, you've taken a deep dive into this subject. What do you see here?
Well, I thought the revised guidance was kind of silly. There's no reason to tell people not to go get tested if they're asymptomatic. But the truth of the matter is, this is kind of much ado about nothing, because for the most part, nobody that's asymptomatic is going to get tested right now. The number of tests are down across the country, and they keep trying to get asymptomatic people to go get tested, and they're just not going to do it. It's just too much of a hassle to go get tested. And as far as the idea that we're going to go use this for contact tracing, when the results are delayed 4 or 5, 10 days, you can't do contact tracing unless you have an immediate result. So I think the testing issue is sort of interesting data to look at. As far as what it really, as far as it affecting the course of the pandemic, I don't see that happening.
Okay, Wayne, I think you recently got tested, right?
Yeah, so I got tested on a Tuesday for a Thursday medical procedure. And when I got there Thursday, I took my mask off. Nurse yelled at me, and I said, I just got tested. She goes, that was Tuesday. Okay? Look, we're not getting tested every 3 hours, every day. Okay? This is all much more of this. Let's stir it up, make us all freak out. And contact tracing, right now, the state of Texas, Harris County, and the city of Houston, all fighting to release the details of what places were actually places where there was community spread of this virus. It is time, for the 90 millionth time, for us to protect the vulnerable and move on with our damn lives.
Okay, Tomaro Bell, you have distributed PPE all over this city. What's your take here?
Listen, I was very upset when the CDC put out their new guidelines. But what Bill said is true. It is very difficult to get asymptomatic people to go get tested unless someone tells them they've been around somebody. I had a family member in my house who had COVID. We all went and got tested. We were all fine except for that one person, but we went and got tested because of that. So I believe that, especially what is occurring is they've reopened these college campuses, and every day you hear that the positive numbers are going up and up. Most of those people are asymptomatic. Most of the people I know were asymptomatic initially. I lost a first cousin last Thursday. He was asymptomatic when his wife had it, and then he ended up dying after 4 days. So I don't think they should tell people not to get tested if you're not showing symptoms, because that's what they were saying initially, and I believe that helped it spread more because they didn't know they had it.
Gonna have to leave it there. Still ahead, when it comes to crime control in Harris County, the buck stops with her. We talk one-on-one with District Attorney Kim Ogg about her bid for re-election. Welcome back. District Attorney Kim Ogg is the chief law enforcement officer for a county of 4.7 million people. That's a big job. She won office as a reform candidate 4 years later amid a high-profile prosecution of former members of an HPD narcotics unit. Ogg has drawn opposition from the police union. With the election now just 64 days away, we talked one-on-one.
Now, your opponent argues that Harris County is less safe than it was 4 years ago, and that you at least are partly responsible. What's your response to that?
Our city is not less safe. In fact, I think we've, believe it or not, avoided a lot of the ultra violence that we've seen in other urban areas, Chicago, Atlanta, Portland. I think that's because we've got strong coalitions between faith community, police, prosecutors, and activists. It's not cozy, but there's checks and balances that seem to work. There were protesters I allowed to be arrested and charged. There were protesters I dismissed. There are still protesters we're going after. I think a big spike has occurred in domestic violence. And so while our streets are safe, not everyone's home is safe. We've seen more elder abuse, more animal abuse, and more domestic violence. And this is a homicide driver. And I think that explains a rise in the homicide numbers, at least in the city of Houston. But the streets are safe. They just always could be safer. I think that's the most important mission, is that the job is never done.
District Attorney Ogg, your opponent is an employee of the Houston Police Officers Union, and if elected would be responsible for holding cops who break the law accountable. In your mind, is that a conflict of interest the public should be worried about?
It's clearly a conflict of interest. Anytime any powerful special interest employee gains a seat, especially one that's meant to be a check and balance on police, as the DA's office is, then you have to be especially cognizant of conflicts of interest. Right now, in representing 5 of the 6 officers charged with everything from lying and stealing to murder, in the Harding Street case, she would have to recuse. Her law firm, the Police Officers Union, is representing 5 of those individuals accused. That means she can't necessarily come in and prosecute. So the ground we've gained for our community in holding bad cops accountable would be lost. And nobody should be more against holding bad cops accountable than good cops. We can't have special interests controlling what evidence goes before a grand jury and what doesn't. We've had that. And prior to this administration, you had very, very few officers actually held accountable and indicted.
Much has been said and written about the slate of so-called reformed judges currently on the bench. You've expressed some frustration. Are they putting defendants with violent criminal histories back on the street? And if judges want to do that, what can your office do to stop it?
And yes, sometimes judges do allow people who we think are dangerous to be back out on the street. I object to the release of repeatedly violent offenders. And I've done it on paper. It's in the court files in individual cases. And I have spoken out publicly. So I think that incarceration is, of course, thought of as a last resort. But unfortunately, there's just a lot of people who need stopping from robbing, raping, and killing.
What's the bottom line here for another term in office?
Making our city the safest city in America remains my goal. So while I'm proud of our track record, I want another 4 years to finish the job.
You can find our interview with Ogg's opponent, Republican Mary Ann Huffman, on our website, fox26houston.com. Up next, the state looking to block a multi-million-dollar distribution of mail-in ballot applications in Harris County. Welcome back. A full-blown battle is underway over Harris County Clerk Chris Hollins's $25 million plan to send absentee mail-in ballot applications to every registered voter. That's more than 2.3 million pieces of mail. Democrats continue to push that it preserves safety during the pandemic, but Republican State Senator Paul Bettencourt says it's an open invitation for vote harvesting and fraud. Thursday, the Secretary of State ordered Harris County to halt the plans. Tony, you think this is a good idea?
Well, let's get something clear. In Texas, voter suppression is a real thing. Anytime someone starts critiquing trying to expand voting by mail, dear viewers, I want you to remind them that Abbott and some of his crew tried to disenfranchise Latino voters. I'm glad MALDEF and LULAC sued them to get Latinos back on the voting rolls, because when it's our community, we are guilty until proven innocent, which is backwards. And additionally, a court just ruled that Texas has to make it easier to follow the national law, where when you renew your license, you can renew your voter registration. So stay on these folks. Everybody should vote now, and it's our individual right.
Okay, Charles Blain, is this a waste of money, as Bettencourt claims?
Yeah, I mean, the cost, $29 million to mail out ballot applications, it's absurd. But also, I think this is just another step in our local county commissioners, local Democrat county commissioners trying to change the electoral process here in Harris County. First, it was the countywide polling. Then it was changing from an elected election clerk to an appointed election clerk. Now we're moving towards this and trying to do mail-in ballots for everybody and 24-hour voting and drive-through voting and all this other stuff. So, yeah, it's expensive, but it's also highly questionable, and I'm glad the Secretary of State slapped it down, and let's hope that they listen to them, but it doesn't seem as though they will.
And we're hearing Paxton, the Attorney General, is also going to back the Secretary of State. Tomaro Bell, what's really going on here?
My concern about this is that if they send out this massive mailing, and for those who have already filed for absentee ballots and been getting absentee ballots for years, is this going to confuse them? Because are they going to turn around and get the one that they knew they were going to get anyway, and then this on top of it? I have really concerns about this. And as I am not a fan of this whole elections administrator thing, I am suspect of anything coming out of that office right now. That's just me.
Okay, Wayne, you smell a rat here, or do you think this is a good deal?
No, I smell another scam. Voter suppression. Look, last time I voted, there were black folks, Hispanic folks, Asian folks, all kinds of folks voting. I didn't see anybody out there saying, hey, you look like Tony Diaz, you can't vote. And we just all decide that you can go vote absentee. It ain't that hard. Take the bus. Ask a friend to take you. This notion that there is some systematic conspiracy to keep people from voting because they're a certain color is so 1950. Can we stop it?
You're ignoring your privilege. That makes it easy for you.
Oh, wait a second. I want to hear Bill King for 20 seconds. Can you tie this up, Bill?
Yeah, so look, I'm in favor of voting by mail. I think you already have that option. But this specific action is not authorized by Texas election law. And so what this means is that any close election, there's going to be a contest. Because if there are enough of those votes cast to make a difference in the election, that's the basis for overturning it. So, election lawyers are going to get rich on this, I think.
Yeah.
Got to leave it there. Coming up, political expression by teachers in Texas classrooms. Should it be banned or encouraged in our public schools? It's a controversy that could be coming to your kid's classroom. The ruckus broke out in Roma, Texas. English teacher Taylor Lifka placed posters on her classroom's virtual bulletin board, including the LGBTQ rainbow and a Black Lives Matter sign. School administrators claiming some parents had complained asked Lifka to pull down the graphics. She said no, was placed on paid leave, but the district reversed course after a petition gathered 30,000 signatures. Okay, panel, is the district picking winners and losers here? I'm going to start with you, Tony.
I think it's really fascinating to watch this unfold, and it was unfair for the school to get her to really try and control and micromanage what she puts in her background. Let's get something clear. She didn't say vote for Joe Biden. She didn't say vote against Donald Trump. So that's within her freedom of speech. And I think this is important because in Arizona, right before they banned Mexican American Studies, they were using similar tactics like this to silence and bully teachers. And she wants to turn this around and make it a teaching moment. I'm proud of her, and I'm glad that school district turned it around.
Wayne, I'm going to play devil's advocate. What if the teacher next door has a MAGA sign?
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask Tony. I'm sure he'd be real thrilled if she had a MAGA sign. Look, how about this? How about we actually teach in classrooms the subject and not worried about making political observations either way? But when they told her to take it down and she said no, I'd have fired her butt.
Okay, Charles Blain, what if the next teacher has a crucifix and a hammer and sickle? I mean, where does it stop? Who gets to decide?
Where does it stop? It is a hyper-local thing, because if you have that in a major city, then you're probably going to get pushback. But in a different part of the state, they might not get pushback. But I think this was an overtly political act, because it's not like she just turned on her screen and it was in her house. She made a virtual classroom and put it up there. So it was definitely political. And, it's up to the school district. It's a very local thing. And if they decided to fire her, then they decided to fire her.
Tomorrow, what's your take?
Look, I agree with Charles. It is a local thing. My teacher, when I was in school, had an anti-apartheid poster up in our classroom. But it was a teaching moment, because we were in Gary, Indiana. We didn't know about apartheid. He told us long before people were talking about free Nelson Mandela. So my thing was, in what context? If she had the Black Lives Matter, the MAGA, the rainbow, the anti, all that, saying, okay, this is what's going on in our world right now, that's one thing. But mine is, what was the messaging for?
Okay, Bill King, 10 seconds.
The more you do this, the more you're going to drive the balkanization of education, and parents are going to start pulling their kids out of things they don't like, and we're going to end up just congregating with people we agree with.
That's it. Thanks for joining us. The conversation continues on a national level with Fox News Sunday and host Chris Wallace. From all of us here, have a safe and healthy week.